Lorem Raelin, Her Imperial Majesty's Minister of the Interior, looked herself over. Of late she'd fallen back on a more traditional look. Her hair was cut in severely at the back and sides, while it tuffed out in a long bouncy forelock at the front. It was a style she'd worn in her youth, and over the years she always returned to it. Her hair was frosty white now, like whitecaps during a storm, and she liked the way it brought out her eyes. Her suit was ambiguous, handsomely made, and not a stitch of it fabbed, yet it wasn't ostentatious. She had learned the value of not standing out. The jacket accentuated her shoulders and her height, but the fabric itself was an unremarkable black with purple at the cuffs. Looking herself over in the mirror, she felt the years wane on her. The events her Empress had set in motion had gone farther and faster than Kamalesh would ever have imagined. Yes, her children were showing their true colours, but matters were getting out of hand. Of course, that's why Kamalesh had left instructions. Raelin had already gone over the arrangements for Camaldry and Laurel. It was Kalira who needed further consideration. Closing her eyes, she drew on her memory augment, running through the data. She was the Interior, and that information was rather a lot. Lamana Davari was Kalira's handler, and so she started there. No one was appointed to the Family Support Division without skills and abilities that set them apart. For Davari, that was her idyllic memory, of course. It was a remarkable feature, and Raelin savoured the irony as she delved deeper into her augment's capabilities. The Shulvanti Imperium did so much to improve the lives of so many, but there was always a cost in lives and treasure. One could only do so much, even with endless resources. There was still the matter of logistics on one end and application on the other. The logistics were self-evident. A replacement prosthetic was always available, but then issues of quality came into play. A cloned replacement was always the apex desired, but that truly was expensive. For everyone else, there were prosthetics. If a Marine lost her arm, Imperial science was more than sufficient to provide a replacement limb that offered an endless array of capabilities, far superior to the original, in everything from dexterity and speed to built-in weaponry. And therein lay the dilemma. The Imperium had a military beyond reckoning, and if that was so, it had retired veterans far beyond reckoning. To create a wholly separate class of women who possessed abilities far beyond the physical norm would, over time, create a class apart. A class that was superior in their enhancements to the women on the street, and there would inevitably be problems. To create schism within a society that had always bound itself together would be catastrophic, tearing apart the social compact. Shulvanti society was based on the sense of belonging, but what happened when you no longer could look at the woman beside you and see an equal, or even an unfortunate? What happened when you saw someone apart? Separate? Segregated? Alien? With actual aliens that wasn't an issue, but with other Shulvanti? The creation of an artificial social class built solely around physical augmentation, who would owe nothing to a social compact and everything to violence? It would be a recipe for disaster. So while physical prosthetics were plentifully available to every injured citizen so they could enjoy a productive life in society, there were limits. Cost was certainly the most significant limit, and the most readily imposed. Unlike expensive cloned limbs, mechanical augmentations followed a predictable path. Once created and mass-produced, the cost per unit invariably dropped. Qualitative enhancements invariably followed, yet costs trended downward over time. Had the Shulvanti Imperium been interested in creating an army of women with laser hands, preternatural vision, hearing, and dexterity, it wouldn't be a matter of cost. No, the social compact would be destroyed, torn apart by a class of have-nots and the haves. And who could ever be certain who or what those haves would be loyal to, if anything? It was a path that led to nothing good. In society after society, the results of such conflicts were always the same. The Imperium's leading cultural anthropologists pointed to the epic disasters that almost invariably followed. Other societies had made such an attempt, yet only the Gears Child has succeeded, turning their drive toward augmentation into an all-embracing religious dogma that crossed all social levels. Ultimately, it was their drive toward an augmented perfection in all its wondrous diversity which provided their cultural unity. It was admirable, and utterly incompatible with Shorvanti mores. For a society built around promoting stability and uplifting the whole, the risks were unthinkable, and so a system of checks had been put into place. Costs were the key. Increasing costs with the medical and technical firms involved in manufacture, imposing artificial strains on the logistics, diverting research, choking off points in the supply chain to impose scarcity. Individually, they were significant problems. Taken together, it ensured that medical augmentations were almost as good as the original limb, but not better. Little more was necessary. Shorvanti's standards of beauty had always emphasized the natural, the original, the pristine. Most augmentations and prosthetics were brutally obvious, and social acceptance had come with a certain stigma. Pity. Of course, necessity bred change. Lorem's memory augmentation pack had become mandatory when she became minister. Invisible to the eye, the unit was located somewhere along her lower abdomen, and while other alterations had been added, it was her memory augment that had proven her most effective asset over the years. A direct neural link into the interior database available with only a thought. In every conceivable way, and in so many that weren't, she was the interior. That Lomana Davari possessed something very similar was rather remarkable. Bestowed by nature, Raylan wondered how it had shaped the agent's life. Davari had reached the pinnacle of her career rather quickly, a testimony to having such an asset coupled with the ability to apply it dispassionately. What you saw you never forgot, and Raylan wondered if Davari ever viewed it as a curse. Having been born with the ability, perhaps she would never understand the difference. There was a burden, but it was one Lorem had the luxury of turning off. Sometimes ignorance was bliss, but not now. Camordri, Loral, and Kalira were in play, and each had their advantages and assets. Lorem Raylan separated the files associated with Kalira, segregating Thomas Warwick and his wives, and partitioned the other files for her attention. There were choices to be made. Barring extreme events, the interior was never meant to directly involve itself in the line of imperial succession, but the threshold for extreme was upon them. Events were becoming far too public. The assembly of nobles were stirring, along with their wayward cat's paws. Involving the interior directly was inconceivable, but a meeting of minds, on the other hand. Raylan checked her jacket once more, hugged her co-wife and kissed her husband, with apologies for missing yet another dinner. Tonight made 837 since getting her augment. Before that, who knew? Lorem Raylan slid inside the comfort of her waiting sedan, and headed out into the twilight of early evening. Hannah always thought she brought more of an intensity to listening than her father. Dad was great at active listening, of course, but she tended to practice it more like listening foo. Once she got someone talking, she could get so entrenched in a conversation that she could have planted a flag. Maybe it was the same thing that made her like tech so much. She liked details, exploring the shades of grey. Subtle nuances mattered, particularly when you were dealing with actual aliens. With Dad's help, Phrysis had made good on settling families into the area. There was a sort of enclave on the outskirts of town, but for the most part her father had found ways to keep the little community from becoming another planet. A farm here, an old homestead there, someone willing to sell off a bit of land on the side for a house out by the creek. By ones and twos, families had moved in and become part of the community, instead of just living near it. There had been more Shorvanti, but also Rakiri, Helcom, and even a family of Cortica. By the time she'd entered high school, Hannah had found herself taking over Melody's role as a sort of bridge ambassador to new girls. Not that Melody and Riala were unfamiliar with the work. They sort of blazed a trail all their own. Mum, Brelak, and Akatai were fussing over Joshua, Jakaran, and Cassie. Mr. Warwick's first wife, Miver, stood by, fascinated with Cassie and Josh. Hannah waved over Melody, Ree, and Levi once they had their food, while Lagos tagged along. During the introductions, Melondi waved over her friends. Soon enough, they were joined around the second living room by Mr. Warwick's adopted daughter, Desi. She moved awkwardly now and then, and was being shepherded by a gaggle of hungry academy girls Melondi introduced as Kellark and Letzi, while the identical twins grinned impishly and introduced themselves as Caslin and Kamara. The only girl that hadn't come over was the Pezrin girl, who was lingering near Mr. Warwick and Dad. Shulvanti never put much emphasis on wanting to eat, but she could tell the girls were holding off and taking their cues from Melondi. Melondi seemed to be taking her cues from Melody, Levi, and, well, her. As the guest humans, it was a nice gesture, and after Mel started picking at, well, it was blue and smelled tangy, everyone tore into the meal. Even without knowing what some of it was, Hannah had to admit it was tasty, though she cast a wary eye over to the kitchen. Trixie seemed to have grown some survival instincts. She sequestered Solana off to the side and weren't coming over. Yumina was off helping Mama Nakatai, while Nixie was having an animated conversation over in the first living room with a woman named Shalea, while Miara was laughing boisterously nearby with another woman named Solani. 2 wives and a fiancé. Damn, and I thought Levi moved fast. Speaking of Mr. Warwick, he was off to the side with Dad. They settled into a corner like judges at a cage fight, while Mr. Tassari and Phrysis started sparring. Vadim had made himself scarce, doing things around the kitchen without getting involved, while Eli... Hannah searched out her older brother and scowled at him. As usual, the doofus wasn't paying attention. He was over knocking back a drink and looking their way now and then. At least he isn't coming over. Probably licking his wounds. Hannah was shaken from that thought as Kellark squeaked, "Shadless? You're kidding? Really?" "Really?" Melody smiled softly, laying a hand on Levi's arm. "The swimming hole was one of the first places Riala and her sisters tried to visit, though you should have seen Jassarin on a pony." Come on, Melody. Seriously?" Jassarin had cleaned up for company and he was blushing now. Letzi and Call Me Lark seemed fascinated with him to one degree or another, though the twins were keeping a cordial distance. Rebound. Definite rebound with those two. Meanwhile, Melondi was keeping an eye on Vadim, though she wasn't being obvious about it. Your listening foo is impressive too, Grasshopper. Hannah reminded herself for the umpteenth time to ask Dad where the grasshopper thing came from, but was diverted. Okay, I have to ask, since Melody brought swimming up. Rihanna grinned like a shark and leaned in. Are you the calendar girls? Come on, you have to be. I mean, the twins? Melody and Levi were turning pink, and Hannah felt like she probably was as well. The academy girls all looked at Melondi. That really is a thing with them. For her part, Melondi was turning bright blue. We didn't think anyone would recognize us. We all sort of did it on a dare. Our friend Jax came up with the idea as a club fundraiser. Ha! I knew it! I win! Riala crowed over at Melody and Levi, who were still looking embarrassed but sharing a grin. No laundry for 2 whole weeks once we get home. Hannah had to blink at that, though Riala was being her usual irrepressible self, and dove right in. Empress's tits, I bet that went well. You couldn't find one after a week. Riala said, between bites of shaved turoks on a bed of something kind of like black spinach. Hope you kept some. The first run already turned into collector's items back home. That was the weird thing about Shulvanti, though when you thought about it, it made perfect sense. Lagos notwithstanding, they were big into collecting things. For people who could fab about anything, something handmade or original was worth a lot. Riala wasn't too bad about it, but a year or 2 after moving in, she confessed how much making a sundress with Melody had meant to her. A hand-stitched dress she could show off to Levi. Hannah was pretty sure Melody had co-wife written all over her from that day on, as far as Ree was concerned. Anyway, Shulvanti were nuts about collecting stuff, and sure enough, Phrysis was in the kitchen having to go at Mr. Dasari about their grandmother's medals not being on display. Bet she wants them for her office. So, what are your plans over at Rovey? Melody broke into the embarrassed silence. Everyone except Largos seemed to be blushing, probably because Ree hadn't started teasing him over pony stories. Are you sure none of you can join us tomorrow night? Everyone says it's a pretty big event. The Academy girls all gave a rapid chorus of, "Busy, thank you," though Hannah couldn't help but notice they again took their cues from Alondi. The girls were pretty close-knit, but it was still a little bit sus. Hannah filed it away for later, as Ree shrugged. What about after? I mean, the rest of the time here. You wouldn't believe how it feels being back after all these years, and we'd love to get to know you better. We're free, except for the day after tomorrow. Caslin shot a look at Kamara, who took over like it was perfectly normal. It was pretty tight with school, but we still made the finals for GC Ultimate in the Destroyer category. Most of the Shield girls looked impressed, and Hannah shot a look at Melody, who shrugged. What's GC Ultimate? She asked curiously. It's sort of the biggest video game ever. Everything from fleet battles down to team shooters on the planets, with Imperium, Consortium, and Alliance factions. The annual competition's a huge deal. Riala cast a glance over at Levi and bit her lip. You couldn't play it on Earth yet because the servers are enormous, plus... Well, everyone said things like that were a little insensitive back then, you know? Gaming had never really been Melody's thing, but Hannah was intrigued. If the Shovanti thought a server was huge, that had to be some serious hardware. She listened as the twins explained they'd been playing since they were kids. Their family business was in ship construction, and they had taken to fast scouts and destroyers. Caslin and I are on Team Ice. I'm Black Ice 965. Caslin nodded, taking over from her sister. And I'm Blue Ice 965. The whole thing was going to be held in a stadium off Orincum Plaza, which seemed to be the biggest entertainment district in the capital. That alone sounded a whole lot more interesting than visiting another museum. Hannah was ready to throttle her fam if they didn't ask her for an invite, when the twins saved her the trouble. We were going to invite you all. It's a pretty sweet setup, and you can sit in our booth, as long as you're quiet. Lynn explained to pretty much everyone. She couldn't see why the twins' status as pro gamers was a big secret, but... Damn, they're looking at Melody again. Okay, that is definitely sus. It would be fun. Everyone was quick enough to say yes, and she felt a knot dissolve inside her. Finally, a chance for a real night out on the town. This was going to be totally... Let's see, you can come too, right? Caslin cocked her head as the other girl squirmed. Actually, I can't. Letsy looked at the sister sheepishly. I'll be there, but I'm Obsidian syndrome. Hannah watched as the twins' jaws hit the floor. Zachariah liked Tom, and was gratified that the feeling seemed mutual. He'd made the trip with no expectations of seeing another human being on Shill, much less in the company of Phrysis' family. Mind you, Bodin wasn't exactly what anyone had a right to expect, but after knowing Phrysis all these years, he figured no one could fault him for being surprised. If there were two more different siblings... A peal of laughter from the second living room caught his attention. The kids seemed to be enjoying themselves, and he felt a moment of real satisfaction as Levi caught his eye and smiled. The boy had done well with Mel and Ree, and if the trip had started a little rocky, he seemed to be finding his stride. But you don't even have our grandmother's baton on display, Phrysis said, with her hands on her hips. The last time I was here, you said it clashed. Sure for the holidays? Well, after so many holidays on Earth, it seemed only fair to Riala. Bodin's restaurant was the importer for McClendon Foods, so Phrysis had pushed the trip as a legitimate business expense. And then Jen got on board. A man had to know when he was beaten, and, truthfully, he'd been just as curious. I don't care! Bodin's eyes flashed angrily as he looked up at her. It was given to me, and here is where it stays. Zack glanced over at Eli. His boys weren't so colourful about their differences as Phrysis and Bodine. Thank goodness. It was good to know after all that happened, some things still seemed impossible. Levi and Eli? Zack tried to imagine his oldest boy walking around the farm in a sequin jumpsuit, and nearly choked on his coffee. Ain't so funny, though. Jen wants me to keep mine. He's not even in your house! Phrysis implored, as the conversation spiraled downhill. Zachariah watched as Phrysis dug in for another assault, but Bodine's eyes had started to bulge in anger. Hanging out in the kitchen still seemed like a good idea, and having Tom there, well, it was a mixed bag. His people sense said Tom was alright, but certain facts were concerning. Warwick had made the news for gutting a Shorvanti admiral. The stories had painted him as defending children, some of the girls here in fact, but the operative words were still killed with a sword. The other thing was something Jen found out. She was getting on like a house of fire with Warwick's wives, trading how we met stories was all part of the package, and Mivere let something slip. Warwick had lost his whole family on the Ides of March, the day the Shorvanti came calling. The upturned collar of Bodine's shirt put Zachariah in mind of a bedazzled cobra, squaring off against a giant purple honey badger. He traded glances with Tom that was a mixture of amused disbelief and, "You're kidding me, aren't you?" and made his opening play. "So, you're a professor?" Zack prided himself on being able to read folks. Course, that was well as easier in a small town where you'd known most folks your whole life, but he still felt confident. That was why he kept an eye on Warwick. Strangers might only be people you didn't know yet, but older folks, the ones who were vets, bore watching. Vets who'd lost everything, doubly so. He hadn't always thought that way, but after that business with Eli? Well, better safe than sorry. Warwick looked like he was rooting for Bodine. Zachariah tended to bet on Phrysis, in all matters of stubborn, but if her cousin had the dingus she wanted, he didn't look ready to give it up. With nothing else to do, they'd retreated to the back of the kitchen to wait out the storm. Tom had brought coffee, which was a treat, since the storm wasn't blowing over fast. "And you have a farm," Tom murmured over his mug, wincing as Phrysis started getting huffy, waving her arms around as she talked about how important her work was. Bodine crossed his arms in a way that reminded him of Jen, the last time Bob Ramsey got condescending at the co-op. The sensible thing would have been to back out, lick her wounds, and call it good, at least for tonight. "Hey, yep, out in the Midwest. Wasn't much to speak of, but Levi and the girls had done a fair bit." Zack nodded, taking another pull from his mug. "Met Phrysis a while after the dust settled. McClendon Foods was mostly Riala's idea, once she heard her uncle was planning to try his own restaurant." Tom looked like he chewed on something bitter for a moment, but the moment passed and he nodded. "I didn't pack nearly enough stores when I left Earth. Raiding his kitchen now and then was a real relief." He raised an eyebrow as he met Zachariah's eyes. "Ever tried a plover?" "Can't say I have." Zack had never seen a man flounce. Brelek wasn't exactly the type. It looked like Bodine could teach classes on it as he bobbed around the kitchen like a cork in the ocean. Whatever was going to happen, it just might take some time. Warwick topped up his mug as Phrysis pulled out the good of the family card. "Don't." "Noted." "Which doesn't matter in the least, and you know it," Bodine hissed, planting his fists on his hips and puffing up like a rooster. "It was given to me, and it's staying here." He and Phrysis were both keeping their voices down, but his body language was getting a bit spirited. Zack looked over at Tom, who barely shrugged in an "ain't seen nothing yet" way. "You're quite a ways from home too," Zack offered. "Where's that, anyway?" "Indianapolis." That was when his blood ran cold. Indiana had been one of the worst red zones in the former US for a while. When the Shorvanti arrived, they'd been very particular about only hitting military targets. The orbital strike on Indianapolis hadn't been their only mistake, but it had definitely been their biggest, and folks there had reacted proportionately. Zack nodded carefully. "You Hoosier boys played rough as hell." For a little while. Tom examined his coffee with rapt attention. "When you lose everything, you have nothing to lose." The resistance had been savage in Indiana, at least briefly. One thing the Hoosier state did was flat. Any farmer could tell you it was good corn country, but for angry men with a thirst for blood, wide open and flat as a pancake didn't offer a lot of cover. The resistance in Indiana had been short-lived, but it had more than made up for it in violence. "And you?" Zachariah asked quietly. It was easy enough to do, as Francis tried to play the matriarch card. Anyone looking at the body language could tell how that went over. "There's nothing to talk about. Things happened, and then they stopped. There's no way it would have happened any other way than it did with the resistance," Tom said. There was a hard edge in his voice, but it faded a bit. "Demobilizing folks is never easy. One way or another, you've suddenly made a lot of people unemployed who are very familiar with mil-spec weapons. It's always happened, every time. The Hessians in the Revolution, the KKK after the Civil War, the Free Corps. If there aren't jobs or something providing identity for them, you will have problems. And with the side that lost, you have a proportional world of hurt with angry or desperate people. Sometimes both. Indiana happened, and then it stopped." "I've met the type," Zack said, choosing his words with care. Tom didn't seem like the type to lose his composure, but until you knew someone, really knew them, it paid to be careful. Even if you could read someone like a book, there were the occasional plot twists. One of those friendly strangers had nearly bitten Eli. The whole family, for that matter. It wasn't the kind of thing you forgot. "I'm not sure what you're asking, Zack, or even if you are, but I'll tell you this much. I was a student of military history even before I joined the Air Force, so I spent more than a little time learning how societies put themselves back together, or don't after a crushing defeat. So believe me when I tell you that unless the winners keep stirring the pot, most people will try and accommodate things. They may not be sympathetic to the New World Order, but they have kids to feed, and lives to get on with. They adjust." "That they do," Zachariah nodded. "Hell of a job convincing him to put the spoon down and step away from the pot, though." He heaved a heavy sigh. "I've seen a lot of good that came with the bad, but when it comes down to it, we're all just folks. The Imperium made good. Roll back climate change. Got rid of the nukes. I expect they saved us from ourselves, if it had come to worst." The many highs and lows since the Travanti came knocking on his door paraded through his mind. Not all folks our age gave up on things so easily. Some still can't. Tom shrugged slowly as they watched the set two between Bodine and Francis. She could be pretty particular when she needed to be, but Bodine had fought it up. Even Francis was getting the hint. "We may not like it. I spent a long time not liking it, but you remember what 2019 was like. More refugees on the move than any time since World War II, and no sign of things calming down. Some of us lost everything, but like it or not, they probably saved us from a lot worse. You think anyone has the right to say, 'I want you to take it all back'?" "Expect not, if we're honest." Zack rinsed out his coffee mug as Francis headed off to check on Brelac. Round 2 was a fair bet, but not tonight. He frowned as he saw Eli knocking back another drink and heading for the living room. How many had the boy had? "We've talked about my field of expertise, and I assume yours is a bit less literal, What subject are you covering at the academy?" "Earth history, compared to Shill's." Tom poured himself another cup of coffee. "World War II once school's back in session." Zachariah peered at Tom but didn't say a word. Folks adjusted, but they did it in their own way, and some still couldn't, around the edges. Eli took another swallow of the not-quite margarita and braced himself on the wall of the hallway. It was the weirdest thing. Absolutely none of the girls who were friends with Vadim wanted to talk to him. Like, at all. He could work with Shy, but they were in the living room getting all buddy-buddy with Levi and the girls. Hell, even Jaceren had proven to be more interesting to the Academy girls, and the boy was still technically jailbait. Well, on Earth at least. I wonder what the rules are here. Either way, the last time he'd had that many women give him the cold shoulder, it had been a decidedly human population. Maybe it was something to do with the Academy. The place was probably bursting with rich, pampered snobs who couldn't look past something like skin color, or the lack of tusks. Don't know what they're missing. Maybe I should call those Helcom girls again. They knew how to make a guy feel welcome. And so, after finding himself being politely ignored, he found himself wandering the house, listening to whatever conversation happened to be nearby. Miara and the shield chick with one arm had been talking about boarding action against a pirate ship of some kind. Every inch of her screamed Marine as loudly as the poster girl in a bad shield porn parody. But it had been cool until they started fangirling over hardware, with a lot of millspeak. It didn't matter how fun the Pirate fucking 9000 was when you used it to vaporize scum in deep space. When you started comparing the merits of the PF9K with the WH40K and the WTF 800M, yeah, pass. The kitchen had been promising, for a while. Dad and Tom Warwick had put their heads together in the corner for some kind of quiet heart-to-heart, but Phrysis and her absolutely fabulous cousin had been having a lively debate about stuff. Like actual, literal stuff. Someone's war medals and junk. Who knew and who cared? Before it managed to turn into a real knockdown drag-out that'd be any fun, Phrysis pivoted into playing matchmaker on Badin's behalf, which chased him off right quick. Don't mind me. I'll just be over here gagging quietly to myself. It was just as well to get out of there. Dad got pissy when he thought Eli had had a few too many, but hey, it was a fucking vacation. He was entitled to some fun, damn it. Thus here he was, wandering the house in search of some kind of mental stimulation. And maybe a little physical stimulation, girls. Yeah, I got it all for you right here, babes. Conversation and laughter drifted from the living room. Eli could no longer find it in himself to actually give a fuck if the rest of them wanted him there or not. Depends on what you're looking for. Melody was addressing the twins seated on the couch opposite her. I mean, if you're trying to find a long-term partner, a lot of girls never think of the boys who they're friends with as anything more than friends. The girls glanced at each other with expressions ranging from confusion to skepticism. We don't have any friends who are boys. Not any? We had one, but he had to leave. It got complicated. You and Riala have a cute husband, though. One of them shrugged, as her sister carried on with a grin at Levi. Maybe you like a third and a fourth. All the Shilvanti girls grinned as Melody leaned over and kissed Levi lightly on the cheek as he turned crimson. You're not on Earth anymore, Dorothy. Eli put on his best smile and gave a nice big wink to the twins. How's if you don't call a guy Rigoi Vake when he's just saying hi, too? You could have heard a pin drop, but hey, they were already hanging off Levi. Bunch of prissy bitches. The girls all looked at him like he'd grown a second head, and Hannah was looking pissed, but what else was new? They had a lot of nerve looking at him like he'd said anything wrong. Levi shook his head and scowled. Eli, you should go. Right now. Should I? His smile slipped towards sneer territory. Oh, big brother trying to look tough in front of the girls? Fuck that. Hell, fuck 'em all. So the Empress buries her fuckwit husband alive, and every Marine on Earth just gets a free pass to play grab-ass, but I try to be friendly here and I'm the jackass? Levi looked ready to say something more, but Melondi got up and studied him half a second. Thank you for the nice evening. We'll be going. Letzi hung their coats up on the return to Lark's apartment. She'd expected the question the whole way home. Lark's reporter senses looked like they were tingling, so it wasn't too surprising when it finally came. 'Let's see how hung that coats up on the return to Lark's apartment. She'd expected the question the whole way home. Lark's reporter senses looked like they were tingling, so it wasn't too surprising when it finally came. 'Let's see how hung that coats up on the return to Lark's apartment. She'd expected the question the whole way home. Lark's reporter senses looked like they were tingling, so it wasn't too surprising when it finally came. So how is it you're this tactical genius and you never told us? I've heard your handle every time I had to go for the esports columns. How could you not tell us your Obsidian syndrome? Lark exclaimed, her head practically tilting onto her shoulder in curiosity. I mean, most pro athletes, even e-athletes, specialize in one thing. You've mastered what? 4 divisions? 6. 6! And you haven't even signed on with a team? You're one of the most sought-after freelancers there is. Money isn't the point. Lexi shrugged as she closed the closet. Anyway, a full-time contract wasn't a commitment I wanted to make. Lark paused mid-rant as another thought seemed to strike her. Why didn't you show off as some tactical whiz during the whole World War I sim? Lexi looked at her friend and rolled the question around in her mind. Out of all the secrets, particularly compared to Mel's, it hadn't seemed a big deal, and it had been hers. Her identity, carved out as she worked her way up in the competitive gaming scene. Under her first handle, Entryburn, she'd use her skills to make money. There was good cash to be made if you had the skills, working as a proxy for others. Money was something her co-sisters had, not her, but she still had access to the family computers. Those were top-notch, with more than enough power for a gaming rig, so she started honing her skills. After a year or so, it became an income, the one her co-mothers would never provide, and the better she'd become, the more she made. The real crunch, the act that made her change her pseudonym and start up new accounts, had come while playing Galaxy Conquest, Naval. In that setting, GC ran multiplayer naval groups in a single theatre. She'd contracted to play on the Imperial side, and the woman paying her team was named Garrison 1138. Garrison and a woman called Crash Impact had a thing going. Everyone had their handles, and they kept your identity a secret as long as you were careful. Still, word got around the boars that Crash Impact ran a commodities brokerage, and no one she'd hired had ever beaten her. Word was that Garrison was one of Impact's clients. Neither one of them was particularly careful about their real-life details, not that Garrison actually played. Both of them hired their teams, but unlike Impact, Garrison just hired people to play as her entire fleet, commander on down. The whole game was just a running grudge match between them. That was just a rumour, but over time, Lexi had come to give it a lot of credence. It all fit. Impact played, and she ran her team as her own commander. She was ruthless, a stone killer who showed no mercy, but that wasn't what ate at Lexi. The galling thing was that when Garrison and Impact played a match, they played for money. Impact usually won, which cost Garrison what Lexi had considered serious money. Unlike tournament play, that kind of side gambling bordered on the illegal, but it happened. The thing was, as match after match went by, Lexi became convinced neither Garrison nor Impact needed the money they won, and couldn't care less about the money they lost. For Garrison, it was just about beating Impact, and the fun of the bets. Their players were paid solely on the statistics. The kills they racked up, the damage taken to their ships, but most of all, how long they survived their month's particular campaign. Over time, she'd gotten the feeling that what Impact liked the most about the game wasn't beating Garrison, or being the better commander. For her, it was all about what it cost Garrison's players. It was about mocking them during each kill, hurting them, and about what it cost them, personally, with each credit they lost. People who subbed out their skills to the credits didn't have a lot of money. Not that she did, but unlike a lot of the people she came to know on the esports boards, more than a few of them lived rougher lives. She lived in a mansion, and even if she felt like a ghost in her own home, it was still a good one. She came to know some of the people she regularly teamed with, and they depended on the credits they earned on the side. The Imperium saw that everyone had a basic stipend, but there was a lot that went beyond just barely surviving, and for some people, the difference in credits between a win and a loss meant a lot. Even if it never came out explicitly, after a few campaigns Lexi could tell. It was there in Impact's barely veiled taunts that she knew it too. She enjoyed knowing that she was hurting people, relished toying with them while she did it, got her clam wet knowing that every kill was taking money from people who had nothing compared to her. Her last game as Entryburn, Lexi had watched as Impact's battlecruiser wiped out her fleet, one ship at a time, mocking them at every turn. The woman prolonged it, darting in and out of engagements, gloating. At the end, Letzi had been the last survivor, and Impact had been hunting her, driving her deeper and deeper into the swelling debris field around a black hole, herding her. That was the day it all came into focus. The ebb and flow of the gravity wells locked in a dance as they spiraled down, seeking and probing and hiding in the darkness. She was being hunted, and then, somehow, she realized that she was hunting Impact. For all her advantages, Impact made tactical errors, so confident of her superior firepower and speed that she didn't care. Lost in the darkness of her headset, alone in her room, that was when Letzi came to see how the grand pattern wove itself together. Killing Impact that night had piled more credits into her bank account than any other match. True to her word, Garrison had paid off handsomely, and Letzi had been sure to share it with her team. But she never contracted for Garrison again. The next day, she deleted all but her closest contacts, scrubbed her accounts as entry burn, and logged in as Obsidian Syndrome. I had issues growing up with my co-family, Letzi shrugged. Other than school, I had a lot of time on my hands. It's not really something I wanted to talk about. Inside his office, Alrada Kadrais pushed away the remains of his dinner and turned back to his work. The night before Evrovi's commencement wasn't just busy, it was the calm before a storm. No one would be at the Typal during tomorrow's commencement address. Usually delivered by the Empress, no self-respecting noble would be caught dead in a house of ill repute, but if the night before was hectic, the 9 days of Evrovi were mayhem. 3 3-day quarters, each featuring an imperial address, offering 1 day for the 9 high deities. Shill sat apart, of course. The days of devotion bordered on hysteria. In the southern hemisphere, where nudity wasn't suicide at this time of year, the day of Shamantul shut down whole cities. That made tomorrow a respite, but tonight there was work to be done. The waiters were overworked, though the tips more than made up for it. Even after stockpiling weeks in advance, the bar was already running low on Helcom Ice Ale, after one particularly inebriated duchess offered drinks for the house. Then there was arranging security for several special customers, women who might not be entirely sober, during the address tomorrow. Some of their clients insisted on having their personal server along. That was fine, as long as they paid for it, but... Alrada looked up at a chime from his door, which opened before he could offer admittance.
I'm dreadfully sorry to intrude without notice, Mr. Caldris, but I suspect neither of us ever has as much time as we'd like, so allow me to introduce myself,
the woman said, as she briskly crossed the room and took a seat.
My name is Lorem Raelin, Joyous Evrovi.